this point, we're moving on to the open forum and the question and answer. And I see there are many questions raised in our Q&A chat box. Just a couple of points before we go on to the discussions. Naomi, may I ask if you can share a bit more on the state of the drug conventions and the directions that we are taking as an international community in relation to the regulatory framework? Because Dr. Bench did mention that our present drug law right now is rooted in the single narcotic drug conventions and the protocols and the 3 drug conventions later on. So at this point, Naomi, what's the general direction of the policy regulatory framework? Is it more towards more punishment? Is it more towards more public health approach? What's the general consensus among the community of nations at this point?
Wow, that's the hot question, Lee, isn't it? I think always different surges and movements and priorities for different governments. When governments come together and meet in Vienna, it is on a consensus basis. And over the past 4 or 5 years at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, we have seen a shift towards recognition of the importance of the leadership of people who use drugs in the drug response and in the importance of a health-based response. When you look at the UN Common Position, that's probably our best international statement in terms of the specific language on decriminalization, on proportionate approaches, on human rights. So I'd say there is a lot of shift in the direction of public health and human rights, which is really positive. At the same time, we know that there are very powerful interests around the world that still have us spending hundreds of billions of dollars on drug law enforcement. And it's going to be there's a tension between those two limbs of drug control, and that's going to be something quite complex for us each to unravel at national level.
Thank you, Naomi.
If I could recommend everybody to go to the IDBC publication, the Shadow Report. It gives a really great update on where we are since UNGAS.
Thank you very much, Naomi. And on that note, when we're talking about the national priorities and the direction for reforms, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A chat box for Dr. Benjamin Reyes, Doc Benj. The question is on reforms to 9165, and they're very related. The first one is on cannabis. What is the present state of the DDB regulation in relation to cannabis? I think that's the first general question. And the second related question is on Section 15. What are your thoughts about changes or amendments in relation to Section 15? So that we can address the fear of people who use drugs. So those 2 questions first, Doc Ben.
Thank you, Lee. As far as cannabis is concerned, the board adopted the approved CND resolution on cannabidiol with 0.2% THC. So basically in medicine form. So we are already allowing medicines mainly based on cannabidiol as long as they have only 0.2% tetrahydrocannabinol. No? But there is also a pending hemp law, hemp bill pending in Congress, which is similar to the hemp, the Farm Act that was adopted by the U.S. Congress. No, they will the bill proposed to allow hemp utilization in industrial and agricultural use as long as they contain 0.3% THC. No, so it's still pending in the House, in the lower house. As to your second concern, Lee, with Section 15, yeah, we are currently proposing an amendment for that particular section. For the information of Naomi, and I think Olivier already knows this, Section 15 of our law specifically mentions that for those who are using, they are given one chance to undergo treatment and rehab But after that first admission to a rehabilitation program, then the next option is already incarceration. No, so right now we're trying to request the Senate, and I think Senator Bato, the head of the Senate Committee on Peace and Order, is amenable to in reviewing that particular. Yeah,
You're
we're hoping that the committee will allow our proposed recommendation for this section, Lee.
Okay, thank you, Doc Bench. I see that Olivier is raising his hand.
Yeah.
Olivier, I'll also take this opportunity to ask the question from Matt Southwell, and you can also jump in with your comment, because Myanmar is a very good example for harm reduction. So Matt Southwell is asking, drug user groups have been key despite community anti-drug groups and punitive criminal environment. And in fact, peer user groups have been distributing needle and syringe, even in conflict zones, and 2 went to jail for 2 years. So Matt is asking, how do we manage the risk for drug user groups? And I think you have another comment.
Yes. So first on this one, yes, I'm quite aware of the 2 guys that unfortunately stayed 2 years in prison. That was a complicated situation, because that was also the result of some groups in Kachin State that were Kachin, and that had a very simplistic view on how to deal with drugs, right? Basically, you cane the user, etc. And so they were triggering the arrest, in fact, and it has been way too long, and thanks God they got out. So in terms of managing the risk, that was what I was mentioning earlier, right? From the organic and the informal deals, try, when the operations are going well, just to reach out more to the mayor, to the police, saying, this is the perimeter, you don't get there, and even you don't arrest the people just out of the perimeter. You turn a blind eye as using your discretionary power. Discretionary power, right? We complain when police is using discretionary power to do bad things, but this is a good way to use the discretionary power of the police. The other protection, by the way, I wanted to mention is, we talked a lot about volunteers in different examples during the 2 days. Of course, volunteers are good. Of course, volunteers are needed. But it's also important at some stage to consider stabilizing, professionalizing, and making the work sustainable. Because volunteers, by essence, they have like 10 other tasks to do, and even other objectives. So I think that's an important part of the sustainability, right? To not work only on volunteers. We can always have. The other part is to really have a look at the burden of the staff, particularly the staff that is going to do outreach work. Outreach work is really demanding, right? And it's really not uncommon to have burnout of the staff. So that's another protection to the program. You also need to look at the people who are going to provide the services, so they are in a good state of mind to be able to perform. They are not just instruments, right? You are saying not instrumentalize the people who use drugs either. The staff, they are all human. They need some respect. And I have forgot to mention 3 things very, very quickly. I promise. One is when we discuss the bills. We also have bills that we should use better. We have the mental health bills. We have the HIV bill that are recent, and that the purpose is also to move the spirit and the articles of those in the overall Narcotic Act to reflect better health approach. And last, I promise, one of the reasons I had difficulties to join you guys is because after all the discussion around the country and the Geneva resolutions about the situation in the country, there is a resolution now on a joint initiative, human rights-based initiative in the Philippines, which includes a drug component. And well, both Benjamin and myself have been in those endless discussions we have to try to, to agree on everything. And we hope to be able to get back to Yusuf. That, of course, includes the role of civil society in all this, right? So I cannot talk more until things are sealed. But that's a very, I think, it's original. For the UN, we don't have that kind of situation anywhere. We cannot say it will go well, neither the government, neither the civil society, but that's a very unique endeavor. So I hope that this can also be used to be of support to the overall reform of or improvement of the approach to drug in the country. I promise now. Push.
Thank you, Olivier. Yeah, I like that you're very interested in coming up with all the different perspectives, no, and harm reduction. There are many questions on Doc Bench on the Q&A. If there would be a person who'd like to say their question live, we highly encourage it. You can use the raised hand button. But for now, Doc Bench, jumping from Olivier's point on the UN joint program and even looking at how harm reduction and other public health interventions will be put in place. This isn't actually the first time that we are familiar with harm reduction. Within our community of drug policy reform advocates, we're very familiar with the experience in Cebu, also mentioned by Olivier a while ago, because back in 2015, we know that the Dangerous Drugs Board came with a resolution 298, and it talks about the needle syringe program in Camagayan, Cebu. Our audience may not be familiar with that experience. Doc Bench, can you talk more about the role of DDB, why the DDB piloted a needle syringe program under a harm reduction framework, and what's the outcome for that?
Okay, thank you, Lee. Actually, the initiative came from the Department of Health through the Philippine National AIDS Council. They issued a resolution, and in response, the Dangerous Drugs Board also adopted what they proposed, no, a pilot program that we conducted in Cebu. At the time, we were able to provide a holistic program which includes HIV concerns, no, and drug addiction concerns. So both the HIV program and the treatment and rehab program of the Department of Health were overseeing that particular the group that was implementing. We were able to tap a private organization. I forgot the name, Lee. No, they were several of them, and for a while it was working well. It was overseen by no less than OIC Assistant Secretary Dr. Eric Tayag. No, and I know they were able to produce some valuable information. Unfortunately, I'm not purview to those information. And yeah, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor, especially if I agree with Olivier, if we can get the consent of the local official. Yeah, I remember now. The only issue that then, which hampered the implementation, it became politicized. Basically, no, the previous mayor who lost in the last election was advocating for it. Somehow, it was used as a political agenda by the other candidate, and I agree with Olivier also that it's almost always political. No, programs like this, especially if you get religion. Religion is actually divided on the matter. We have Catholic priests who were joining us in the campaign, but we also had some on the other side. No, so it became politicized. That's the problem, Lee. No, and of course the higher government agencies meddled, and that's it. We were not able to continue that program, but we're still hoping that the Department of Health will again push for it under the new HIV law, as mentioned by Olivier, and maybe under the Mental Health Act, newly approved Mental Health Act, so that we can again pursue some initiatives in this concern.
Thank you, Doc Bench. Doc Bench, you were speaking on the political factors affecting drug policy implementation, and in the Q&A, I see a lot of questions related to the war on drugs, and I have to read and maybe join them together so that I can give you an opportunity to explain your thoughts on these issues. So some of them are a bit related. We have a question, an anonymous question. Dr. Reyes, you had mentioned that compared to previous administrations, drug problem had prioritized address the issue. What is your sentiment or position on the drug war? This is also related to Matt's question. Matt's question is, how do these harm reduction services engage people who use drugs against the backdrop of extrajudicial killings of people who use drugs? There's a related question also. What is your opinion on harm reduction in the context of war on drugs? And one also related, how do we do harm reduction in the context of the president's shoot to kill order? Okay, Doc
The
Bench.
question is too difficult. He decided to disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm losing my connection. So,
So Doc Bench, very difficult questions, 4 questions, they're all related, but basically the question is, first, what are your thoughts, sentiments on war on drugs, and how does it affect our harm reduction initiatives? The floor is yours, Doc Bench.
thank you, Lee. Well, as I mentioned earlier, in fairness, for the first time, I really felt that the drug campaign is.
You know, when it's
Hello.
an exciting answer, the internet.
I was hoping for my internet to be cut off. No. As I was mentioning in my talk earlier, Lee, in fairness, no, never have I felt the drug campaign as a priority before, no, and for the first time, we've received logistical support, funding more than triple, more than quadruple, more than 10 times what we had during the previous administration. Now, in fairness, Lee, from the very beginning, even when I was still the chairman of the Dangerous Drugs Board, we have always mentioned that we do not condone EJKs. No, and in fact, this was recently verbalized by Secretary Menardo Guevara. He admitted that there were some problems, no, especially in the supply reduction part of the campaign, and the government is seriously looking into what happened, no, in those cases. So again, we have been very consistent in our pronouncements, and even in the Philippine anti-illegal drugs strategy under the executive order, it is clear that all implementors must conform with existing laws, no, and the respect for human rights. That's the reason it was emphasized in that document. The implementation is not perfect. Definitely, we still have a lot to improve. In the context of harm reduction, as I mentioned earlier, outside of implementing full blast the needle syringe exchange program and maybe the medicine substitution, we have been adopting harm reduction principles. And just to echo what Olivier mentioned, maybe unfortunately there's already stigma in the word harm reduction among our politicians in the Philippines, no? And I agree, we did not call it as harm reduction, no? As long as we're doing it. Singapore during the last CND meeting used the term harm prevention. No? So, well, it's another nomenclature they're using. I don't know how they define harm prevention. But again, what's in the word, no? As long as the necessary services are being provided, the necessary principles are being implemented, no, by our agencies. So I hope that answered some of your concerns, Lee.
That answered the first part, Doc Bench, but I want to dig a bit more on the second question on how the harm reduction services were affected, or how do we push for more harm reduction services given this environment that we have right now. And maybe, Doc Bench, you can tell us more about the UN Joint Program as a response to all the observation of the Human Rights Council on relation to the human rights situation in the country. And I understand the government is coming up with responses to introduce drug policy reform. So maybe you can talk more about that, Doc.
Okay. Well, the client process flow that we have adopted, is a good opportunity to include harm reduction services. As you well know, Lee, now we're making services accessible even for those who have zero to low risk, low behavioral risk, for addiction. We are providing a broad range of preventive services, and we are now incorporating, dare I say it now, some treatment principles also in our primary healthcare services, which we hopefully can institutionalize before the end of this administration. And it's good that you also mentioned the initiative of the UN Joint Program initiative. Again, I agree that this is a good opportunity to explore and pilot models. Olivier has been mentioning to us what they did in Myanmar, which is a highly militaristic, which has a highly militaristic structure. But they were able to convince the policymakers to at least look into the program, and I'm sure we can do that. No, maybe slowly, but surely, Lee. Maybe we can look at champions first. No, who can champion our cause, and maybe discuss, as we are doing now, what would be the pros and the cons of having these reforms in our policies?
Thank you, Doc Bench. Olivier, I saw you raising your hand, but let me just throw a question first on Naomi from the Q&A, and maybe you can jump in on some of your thoughts also. Naomi, there's a question here. Is it possible that both law enforcement and harm reduction meet, or are they both really opposite poles that can't really make ends meet? So I guess, how do we come up with a framework, a regulatory framework that balances that law enforcement purpose and that harm reduction purpose? And where do we see the intersection between the two?
This is a really good question. I think that in our current framework and policy environments, it's really useful and strategic to engage law enforcement officers because it begins to put a kind of cut in the line where somebody is arrested and sucked into a system and criminalized in a disproportionate manner. I think in the long term, in a kind of utopia type situation, we wouldn't need law enforcement officers or the police to be involved in anybody's choice to use drugs. They don't have a role in public health, they have a role in public safety. And so I think that while around the world every year I meet spectacular champions and leaders of, from the police force working with harm reduction allies, in the long term it would be nice if we could kind of resort to a position where, right to bodily autonomy, right to privacy, and right to health were the priorities rather than people being policed.
Naomi, since we're already with you, Matt Southwell has a question. Carl Hart, in his excellent book, Drugs for Grown-Ups, that was this morning session, suggests that linking the word harm reduction and drugs results in a negative branding for drugs. Carl proposes a more positive framing as health and happiness. How do you see the term? So what are your thoughts on Matt's question?
Matt Southwell, tough questions from the crowd. And I actually just read that chapter in Carl's book. And I think that Carl makes a really good point, that we want to get away from a framing of drug use being a negative thing. But I think that harm reduction, in an ideal world, it would be all encompassing of pleasure, of choice, of individuality, and we wouldn't have that negative connotation. Health and happiness is fabulous, though.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Olivier, I see that you're raising your hand. Can you also, so you can chime in on your thought, and maybe I can link it to one of the question in relation to the UN, because you mentioned about the indicators on harm reduction in the UN document. Can you also share more about like what we are looking at in terms of the direction of harm reduction and the UN joint program?
Okay, sorry, there are many things. The first comment I wanted to make, right? The difficulties of having harm reduction in Cebu area started early 2000 and faced difficulties and honestly failure way before the war on drug campaign, which means that there are other factors that are, systemic that we need to address at the same time as we try to have a local intervention. Similarly, the prisons were already completely overcrowded before the campaign, right? Of course, logically, campaign is going to drive so many more people in pre-trial detention and in serving sentences. So I think that what is important is we need to have a look at what we can do now, what we can do in 1 year, what we can do in 5, right? And what we can do now is in the Philippine anti-drug strategies that was issued after the start of the war on drug, right? Is that there's a whole chapter on the demand reduction. So this is a nice framework, but the role of the different actors is to say to the local government, hey, you are supposed to provide services. What are the services? Centrally, hey, Benjamin, what are you spending properly the money you receive? Are you asking, etc., etc.? That's one. The second topic was on the question of Naomi, and you can see that there are also questions from TLF Share, like NGO here, Naomi. We have been working a lot since 2014 on that. I was still in Bangkok on providing assistance to law enforcement to understand and support HIV services. You see, in that case, it was impossible to put the name harm reduction there because, so we've been already working, we have modules, and now together with TLF Share, there is a whole manual that has been prepared to explain the role of law enforcement to law enforcement in a good response. The role of law enforcement is not to go to the classes and play doctor or scare tactic. The role is, one of the role is, if you see someone, you don't arrest him. You can't arrest him because he doesn't have the quantity on him, but you feel he's using drugs, you just refer him to a voluntary facility, right? So that's one. Now the last one was on harm reduction and the joint program, right?
Yes. What are we looking at in terms of the joint program?
Yeah, well, so obviously, as I was saying earlier, Rome was not done in a day, right? Or something like that. So in that program, we could not have indicators yet on service delivery because we are still far from having this approved. So what we have included there is advocacy for harm reduction. And in that advocacy, we hope to have the possibility of an agreement on a form of pilot in Cebu and Mandaue and the adjacent city, right? So this is what we aim for. And obviously, some people I know in the civil society would have to be involved in that advocacy, of course. So that's what is in this proposal. After, honestly, if there is a trigger, a change of paradigm locally and centrally, right? We cannot also imagine that this would happen without some kind of visto bueno from central politicians somehow. But then it won't be an issue to deploy services. And then to also check if injection is happening out of Cebu, right? Out of Cebu area, because we have concerns that even if it's difficult to evaluate properly the size through the sampling method, especially in the context of the war on drugs, we know that injection is happening elsewhere, and if this is not monitored, so we are able to address the communities somehow, that can be a real issue, especially if combined with the synthetic opioid potential injection too. Sorry, I try to respond. Over.
Thank you, Olivier. Doc Bench, I see you're raising your hand, and I'll take this opportunity to ask the hard questions again, because there are a lot in Q&A, a lot of interest in you, Doc Bench, as you're very familiar with this. Doc Bench, Attorney Bok is asking, isn't it the fact that the increase in the budget for the war on drugs mostly went to PNP, and there was no commensurate, so the Philippine National Police, no? There was no commensurate increase in the Department of Health, Department of Social Welfare and Development, even in the PDEA budgets. And I link this also because Nisa from iDefend is also asking, has the roles between the Dangerous Drugs Board and PDEA, has it been resolved? So, Doc Bench, first question on the budget, second, the mandate of DDB and PDEA.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Actually, that's the reason why I raised my hand. I just saw that there were so many questions in the chat box. I never realized how popular is this topic. First, with regards to the budget, but definitely both demand reduction agencies, so development agencies, Department of Health, DDB, DepEd, DSWD, increases in the respective budget for the past few years. No? And also definitely it's the same for supply reduction agency. So PDEA got a significant chunk of the budget. I'm not purview to the exact amount, but I can assure you all of the agencies were given appropriate logistics to carry out their respective mandates. Unfortunately, COVID happened, and most of our resources were diverted to address the COVID pandemic. The next question, the responsibilities between DDB and PDEA. From the very beginning, I think there's no confusion in the roles of both agencies. DDB is the policy-making body, and PDEA is our implementing arm. So whatever policies, procedures that needs to be implemented by our implementation arm, PDEA, it needs to be approved and issued by the Dangerous Drugs Board. So there's a big difference, let me compare it to NAPOLCOM and the PNP and the Philippine National Police. NAPOLCOM, the National Police Commission, is the policy-making body, and PNP is their implementing arm. So we're something similar to that, Lee. I also want to address, because there's a question here: how can you reconcile the fact that law enforcers carry out EJK despite the policies? No, we're not reconciling it. As I mentioned earlier, Secretary Menardo Guevara made it very clear in his public pronouncements, that these law enforcement agents will be made accountable. And what we can do, Lee, and we have been discussing this with Olivier and with the Commission on Human Rights. What we can do is perhaps to teach the victims, and make possible grievance mechanisms available to them, and for them to know their rights, with regards to their experiences, if they experience violations. So we always make it a point to inform our enforcers that they need to uphold the law, follow Philippine laws, no, and respect, of course, human rights of individuals. So a classic example, of course, this is just one case, no. I think everyone is familiar with the slaying of Kian, no, the teenager who died in Caloocan. At least in that case, they were the family was already at least provided justice, no, by our court systems. So the policemen involved were already convicted in their crimes, and we are now also reviewing the protocols and procedures. The Dangerous Drugs Board adopted a unified enforcement manual, no, that should be followed. We are in the process of finalizing some details. We're just looking at some legal details now that we want to address. But hopefully, the procedural manual will now strengthen the operations procedures of all of our enforcements implementing activities on the ground. So hopefully, and then of course the policy of wearing body cams. I think PNP already was able to procure those body cams, no, and they are set to use them in the following year, no. So again, we are not reconciling it, as mentioned by Secretary Minardo. We will make them accountable, no.
Thank you, Doc Bench. I think we can go so far as to say we condemn all human rights violations, we condemn all extrajudicial killings, and we need to make sure that the rule of law and accountability is put there. I think that's the whole framework that we can all agree with from a harm reduction perspective. Doc Bench, there's a follow-up question here from Naomi from TLF Share. TLF Share is implementing the Global Fund, GFATM, Human Rights and HIV Program of the country. Her question is, the new AIDS law, which is silent on harm reduction, and House Bill 7814. I think 7814, the bill amending 9165, reintroducing death penalty, criminal presumptions, and more punishment. Is there a space for dialogue to harmonize policies? I think from the perspective of one implementing HIV programs and human rights programs and the new AIDS law and House Bill 7814. What are your thoughts on that, Doc Bench?
Actually, that's one of our issues because we were not involved in the crafting of the law. No, in fact, even the mental health law, when it was being reviewed, they allowed us to provide inputs only in the early stages of the development. No. But in the later stages, when the law was already transferred to the upper house, the DDB was not invited. No, but again, most of our policies are in line with the mental health law. I'm not so sure with the AIDS law. Again, we were not involved with that. But I'm sure with the Department of Health, no, they will make sure that at least our policies are also aligned. I'll try to look at it, Lee, and see how we can help. No.
Thank you, Doc Bench. I'm looking at some of the questions. So just a quick time check. It's right now at 6:24. Our chill session for later is going to be at 7:15. So we're a bit down on some of the few questions we have on the Q&A. And I'm looking at the question. Maybe Naomi maybe can answer this question. Given the global outbreak of the COVID-19 and seemingly endless battle against it, will there be implication on the conversation and policies relating to regarding the drug problem and I'd also the question the person asking would like to know what changes do you foresee in policies in the context of the pandemic. So I guess COVID-19 and drug policies, and what are the expectations for our a reform on that end.
Yeah, really good question. I think we can't ignore the fact we're still slowly emerging from a global health crisis. I think at a really top level, there's never been greater global focus on inequity. Like COVID really laid bare how health systems aren't working, on how poor people and disadvantaged people have much harder times accessing the right information and healthcare services. So I hope, in this kind of global fight for equitable access to a vaccine, we see that applied to broader public health issues. At the same time, as we saw the Black Lives Matter movement really gain strong foothold last year and really respond with rage to the murder of George Floyd and this, compelling verdict for accountability we saw last week. I think that we have a new global lens on accountability around policing, which is really excited and well overdue. So I think those two things are the backdrop to what we're going to be dealing with and discussing in harm reduction and drug policy. I really feel like Matt Southwell should be on screen because there's so much he's adding to this conversation in my head from previous chats we've had and in the chat. But, as Matt would tell you, peers were the first out there, delivering information, keeping people safe when it came to making sure harm reduction services were sustained throughout the pandemic. This links to something Olivier said. We need to recognize the role of peer workers as peers in outreach positions, as peers, as the leads in harm reduction services. We can't go a minute longer pretending that there's some volunteer role that they're filling. They are central players in the delivery of harm reduction. The second thing is we saw some really interesting policy adaptations in the scope of the COVID pandemic. Arguably, some of them better for quality of life for people who use drugs in the long run. When we did the Global State of Harm Reduction report last year, we also counted more than 40 countries that had adapted their approach to administration of methadone and buprenorphine. So because opiate agonist therapy is a controlled medicine, they come under the purview of the International Drug Control Conventions, and that means the transport of them, the import of them, the storage of them, goes through additional regulatory requirements that you don't see for paracetamol or over-the-counter medications. And so if we see in more than 40 countries around the world, so more than half of the countries that actually use methadone as a treatment for the people who use drugs, if we see more flexibility in prescribing, longer take-home doses, more attention to the client's needs, those are changes we should be preserving post-pandemic, because those go to what the client, Matt Southwell, Judy Chang, the community of people who use drugs, and PUD have been calling for greater flexibilities in methadone prescribing for years. Going to a clinic for a daily dose is not sustainable for improving all the other components of your life. When a person no longer needs that daily connection with the healthcare service, they should have the option of taking their methadone home. So big picture, small picture.
Thank you very much. Very well said. Doc Bench, I go back to you. The most sought after speaker for today. Doc Bench, the question is in relation to children and education. So one is knowing that we have had the experience with Kian, how can we ensure that our drug policy and framework, that children and Kian will be protected in the anti-drug campaign? And the other one related to it is in relation to drug education. Anonymous question said that currently it's all about just say N-O, no, but rather it should be just say K-N-O-W, just say no. We know na most kapag mga bata aayaw ng no. Okay, so two things about children. How do we protect them, knowing that the experience in Kian happened, and the other one is on drug education. Take it away, Doc Punch.
The Kian case and children protection activities actually was discussed in the initial draft of the UNJP document, and we're looking forward on how to develop this further, Lee. No, of course we need to work with the SWD, JJWC on this. I can already inform everyone that after the board issued, I don't know if you're familiar, the board issued the board regulation number 6 series of 2019, which provide for guidelines in handling minors allegedly involved in drugs. The Juvenile Justice Welfare Council is already proposing additional amendments to those, Lee. No, and maybe we can also address the issue that was raised. As far as DepEd is concerned, just came from before this meeting. I just came from a meeting with DepEd actually. No, they were presenting a broad range of prevention activities and capacity building activities for their teachers as well as for the learners. And I'm sure, yeah, I agree with the observation mentioned in the chat box. I don't think the Just Say No policy has been adopted as a general rule, no, in DepEd. They have several prevention programs, and I think maybe some localities have adopted the Just Say No campaign, no. But as a general rule, I think it's not being implemented nationwide. So yeah, we can discuss that with our counterparts. The current K-12 curriculum that has been approved by DepEd already incorporated addiction prevention messages and information. Yeah, we will be happy to work with you on how to develop the curriculum, no, especially with DepEd.
Thank you very much, Doc Bench. There are many brilliant comments in the chat box, and I'd like to read them because I know that not everyone is on Air Meets. Some of our guests are on Facebook and YouTube Live. So the first comment is from Matt. Matt said that tailoring to country needs is a key part of harm reduction and community mobilization. However, violating human rights is not excused by country exceptionalism. We have another comment here from Lois from Save the Children. It's very promising to hear these recent developments and steps taken by DDB to reform the drug policy and framework in the country. And maybe Doc Bench can also, well, it's been done already, the comment on the children that was mentioned a while ago. So thank you for that, Lois. There's also a comment here from Attorney Tatay. Harm reduction services are allowed in Section 23 to 24 of the new HIV law. And because Tatay has been involved in the discussion of the HIV law, she said, with all due respect, DDB approved providing harm reduction services for PLHIV during the committee hearings, and the community appreciated the DDB for that. And we're also very thankful for Doc Bench actually for all the hard, heavy lifting that he's doing for harm reduction and pushing for scientific changes in our policy. Another comment from Matt Southwell. Great to hear this dynamic discussion, importance of harm reduction and community mobilization, and the need to end the counterproductive war on drugs and PH. Okay, congrats to our organizers. And comment from, no, that's from Naomi. Okay, so I know that we have a lot of questions, but actually I just realized we've gone way ahead of our schedule, and I'm just so happy that our speakers are so patient in answering all the difficult questions and all the exchanges that happen. And if I may have missed some of the questions, or if you have some more questions, we have booths, we have Freedom Wall. Please do send them in so we can have more discussions on that. Just on a final round of comment, we'll do it in reverse. We will start with Olivier this time, and followed by Doc Bench, and then Naomi after. Olivier, the floor is yours.
For once, I'm speechless. No, just, I mean, the point I would like to make is we need to engage with people out of our natural group, right? For instance, the same week, unfortunately, that's an unfortunate overlap. We had another conference which was on substance abuse, but was was also touching other topics, including harm reduction, and Lee and Benjamin were also part of that, right? So I think the engagement, I think not closing us into one particular group, clan, clique, or whatever we want to call it, is really beneficial. We cannot do it alone, right? If we feel we're right, well, then we need to get other people to help. So I think that's, and I think we have to congratulate Yusek Reyes, because he had to deal with many complicated questions. But the same way the government has its own cross-cutting institutional body, we are trying to act on solid consortium like the Asian consortium from the policy, or flexible group that we have now, which is also linked to the consortium. But what I mean is, okay, sorry, I'm going to come with such a platitude. It takes a network to defeat a network. It requires a gathering of people, and the people who come from outside, like me, we are only to serve you, right? That really depends on you, right? So, and that will depend on the local level. So I think it is counterintuitive for people out of the Philippines sometimes, but there is amazing work that has been done that really should be known and replicated. And then, yes, it's never perfect, but we keep moving. Over.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And I just remembered Dr. Adiba mentioning yesterday that UNODC's role is really pioneering in terms of standing up and pushing for the public health approach. So we're very happy that Olivier and UNODC have very strong presence here in the Philippines. So we're very thankful for the support for all these initiatives from UNODC. Over to you now, Doc Bench, for your final words.
Thank you, Lee. And understandably, there's a lot of anonymity, with regards to the drug campaign, because as I mentioned and as admitted by Secretary Menardo Guevara, some enforcement elements failed to follow the policies and the rule of law, and respect of human rights. But again, let me assure everyone, the Philippine Anti-Illegal Drug Strategy that was approved by the current administration adheres to the rule of law and human rights. Of course, the frameworks are the development of the framework is a dynamic process, and it helps to have discussions like this. Conferences like this, so that we can exchange ideas and maybe develop models, which we can follow. So siguro as parting words na lang, Lee, rest assured that your government is committed in providing the best for our people, as far as addiction concerns, and again, there are good people in government working towards adopting good policies and good programs. And don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. And as I mentioned in my initial presentation, I'm very hopeful that we're headed towards the right direction. But we need all of your help. Help us how to empower our people, to know their rights. Help the agencies report erring enforcement officials. We need to do this, every one of us. Now, don't leave the concerns to the government alone. Now, we need a whole of nation approach in order to address the drug problem. Thank you, Lee, and I hope to engage with all of you soon.
Thank you, Doc Bench. I can resonate when you say that there are good people in government, and I know that you're one of the good people in government. And true to form, we're happy that you're representing the government and re-emphasizing the commitment of the government to human rights. on the side of our civil society organization, children's rights groups, HIV groups, we're all going to keep that hat of making sure that the government stays within the bound of its mandate to promoting human rights, and we will keep asking these difficult questions as part of a healthy and vibrant community. And we're very happy for the support and open dialogue that we're having with the government right now, and very looking forward to the UN joint program implementation on making sure that we do accountability structures for what was described last year by the Human Rights Council in terms of the human rights situation in the Philippines. Thank you, Doc Bench, for joining us today. And final words from Naomi. Naomi, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lee, and thank you to Olivier and Doc Benj. I really, everything you've just said as a closing remark really resonates with me. Two things kind of jump to my head. You know, the best thing about harm reduction is it makes you smarter. It forces you to interrogate all your presumptions about A plus B equals C, and to really look for the evidence base to see what actually works in terms of public health and in terms of human rights. And so in that context, we're very lucky to have the leadership of Doc Benj, of NoBox, Olivier from UNODC, really kind of pushing to change things. A very smart person once said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I think this conversation we're having in this summit this week is doing something new. So congratulations, NoBox.
Thank you very much, Naomi. That's a very inspiring thought to end this session. I'm looking at the participant list, and I know that it's very varied, and I hope that these types of conversations will continue. And we encourage everyone to continue the conversations, asking difficult questions, because in a way, that's the only way for us to provide more support for people who use drugs. And for us to realize harm reduction, the true meaning of harm reduction, I think we really have to commit to looking at the different aspects, different angles, different perspectives. And most importantly, as we always say in NoBox, it's never about the drugs, but it's always about the people.